If you were to do a quick Google search for like best foods for the gut, you would be told to eat a bunch of fruits and vegetables and things that are just good for your gut in very general terms. The gut is more complex than that. When you start having an understanding of biochemistry and the microbiome, you realize that it's not just about fiber. We have to look at, okay, the microbiome and their function. We have to look at short chain fatty acids. We have to look at microbiome diversity. We have to look at bile and how we can break down fats. Then we also have to look at the gut lining. So there's all these different things we have to look at. So with this, we've compiled the best foods for gut health and break them down into different categories. So you really have a well-rounded look at what is truly good for your gut. Without further ado, let's jump in. The first one is one that you've probably heard of before, psyllium. Now, psyllium is like what you'd find in Metamucil, right? It's a husk, okay? And you can use it in baking. In fact, you see it in a lot of like low-carb baking these days. But it's interesting because it has a very profound effect at sort of restabilizing the gut microbiome, especially if you already have dysfunction within your gut. So it's sort of a fixer, if we want to call it that. Now, there was a study that was published in the International Journal of Medicinal Sciences, and it was fascinating because it took a look at 8 healthy individuals alongside 16 constipated individuals. Okay, and they gave them 7.5 grams of psyllium, or they gave them half maltodextrin and half psyllium. Okay, they did this for 6 days. The results were interesting. Now, in both the groups that had psyllium, they ended up having a small but significant effect on their microbiome health. What that means is that they ended up, it was a small kind of thing on data in terms of paper, like what it looked like on paper, but as far as the effect that that change would elicit was pretty powerful. Okay, well that's cool. That was in the healthy people. In the people that were constipated, it had a significantly more pronounced effect on their microbiome. Okay, why is this interesting? Because psyllium coming in and sort of rescuing a dysfunctional microbiome, not only fixing the constipation issue, but remodeling the gut bacteria. They also saw an increase in Veillonella. Now, Veillonella is a specific strain of bacteria that I'm fascinated with because if you look at marathon runners and athletes, they have high levels of Veillonella because it feeds on lactate. So if we increase Veillonella levels, it might actually help us become better athletes. It's kind of wild, okay, at least theoretically. Plus, there are specific increases in Faecalibacterium and Lactospira, which are very, very clear and defined strong butyrate producers, which means they're producing a lot of short chain fatty acids. So load up on the psyllium, don't be afraid of it. Next, we have artichoke. Now, artichoke is cool because it's in a slightly different category. Artichoke has 2 different things. It has inulin and it has cynarin. Now with inulin, we know inulin is a very strong soluble fiber. Okay, now there's something called very long chain inulin in artichokes that's very unique. It takes a long time for the gut to break down and it really provides a solid fuel for the gut microbiome. There was a study that was published in the British Journal of Nutrition that took a look at 10 grams of inulin. Okay, and they did this for 16 days in subjects, and they saw that there was a specific increase in bifidobacterium, which is associated with an antioxidant effect. So it might even have sort of a free radical scavenging effect within the body. So it's specifically helping bacteria that are good for another situation of not only our gut, but the rest of our body. That's cool, but what's really interesting is the study that was published in Phytomedicine that was taking a look at cynarin. Okay, now it found that cynarin helps increase bile secretion. Okay, so when they gave subjects direct cynarin, after 30 minutes, they had a 127% increase in bile secretion. After 60 minutes, they had a 151% increase in bile secretion. This is so important because it stimulates pancreatic lipase, so it stimulates the production of the enzymes that actually break down fats, and it also literally breaks down the fats itself. So if you're eating a lower carb, higher fat diet, this becomes so unbelievably important. Now this next one is bone broth, which is super interesting. Works upon a different axis. We think gut health and we think our microbiome. We forget about the gut mucosal layer. Now bone broth contains 2 very important things, gelatin and glutamine. Okay, these do very specific things. There was an interesting study that looked at gelatin. So this study was published in Food Science and Nutrition. Okay, it was in mice, but they gave mice gelatin. And these mice had colitis, and they found that gelatin actually prevented the increase in inflammation in the colon. It decreased or it prevented the increase in IL-6, in IL-1 beta, and TNF, tumor necrosis factor alpha, which is associated with colitis. But it didn't stop there. It got really interesting because when you look at the breakdown, like what gelatin breaks down into further, in this case we've got glycine and hydroxyproline, when those are present, they actually saw not only a decrease in inflammation in the colon, but they saw a decrease in inflammation in the bloodstream associated with the colitis. So a healthier gut preventing pathogenic material going into the bloodstream and triggering an inflammatory response. Now, another thing that bone broth has is glutamine, which is very interesting. Glutamine increases the expression of the proteins that form the junctions in our gut. Okay, so when you have these proteins being expressed, it basically creates tighter junctions. Imagine having a gate, but the posts for the gate are like separate and really far apart. So the gate's kind of not doing a job because between the fence and the gate, there's still a 4-foot gap. Now, if you were to actually put some posts in between that, you could run the fence all the way to the gate. That's kind of what these proteins are doing. For bone broth, I put a link down below for Kettle and Fire. Awesome bone broth. They've been a sponsor of this channel for a long time. This is a bone broth you can get just about anywhere, but that cool link down below is going to get you 20% off their bone broths. They don't just have regular bone broth. They have beef broth, they have chicken, but they also have a bunch of different soups, and they have things like miso soup. They have all kinds of delicious flavors that you can try. Plus they have seasoned broth. It's just awesome just to sip on if you're fasting or something like that. So 20% off Kettle and Fire bone broth. They also add apple cider vinegar into their broth, so you're getting an additional sort of metabolic effect there as well. So that link, once again, it's a special link to save 20% off. You're not gonna find that link anywhere else but on this video. So that one is down below in the description for after you're done. Okay, the next thing we have to focus on is flax. Now, flax is unique because it has soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. And before you rain on the flax parade saying that flax is going to be estrogenic, there's actually been some research that takes a look at that and found that, believe it or not, flax supports the microbiome so much that it actually helps what is called the estrobolome. The estrobolome is an area of the microbiome that specifically metabolizes estrogens so that you're not having the circulating 1,6-hydroxyestradiol. Okay, by metabolizing estrogens in the gut, you can process them and excrete them. And this is what we're after. Now, all that aside, I just wanted to say that for the naysayers, flax is interesting because it really does affect the gut uniquely. The British Journal of Nutrition published a paper that took a look at 10 grams of flax, okay, compared to a little bit of Paracasey F19, so they were adding a specific probiotic in there, versus placebo. They wanted to see, okay, what is this flax fiber, how does it compare to like direct probiotic effect? They found that the flax group ended up having a significant improvement, and it changed the bacteria so much that it impacted insulin sensitivity. It increased insulin sensitivity and it improved overall insulin secretion, meaning that it's probably affecting how things are absorbed in the gut, but it's also probably affecting the signaling. So they noticed that it changed and altered 33 different species of bacteria. Okay, you compare that to, say, psyllium, which was profound in its own way, but flax was much more diverse in terms of how much in the way of bacteria it changed. Flax is a very, very powerful thing here. Now, the last thing we need to talk about, which is a very important piece as well, is microbial diversity. Okay? Now, where does that come into play? Well, that's where fermented foods come in. Now, if you look at the data, you can look at like kombucha, you can look at sauerkraut, you can look at kimchi, and then you can look at things like kefir and like fermented dairy. As far as a probiotic effect is concerned, fermented dairy is the only thing that's really been documented to have a probiotic effect, meaning an additive like adds bacteria into the gut. But that doesn't mean that all fermented foods aren't good. I think they all have a place. And there was a relatively recent study published in 2021 in the journal Cell that took a look at plant-based fiber compared to fermented foods to see what the impact would be. Well, it was an 18-person study for 17 weeks, and the results were very interesting. They found that the plant-based fibers didn't really do much for gut diversity. However, they did increase the effect, and they did increase the short-chain fatty acid effect. Now, what we mean by that is the plant-based fibers helped the bacteria flourish, and do what they do best and produce short-chain fatty acids that have a positive impact on our body. But what the fermented foods did was really cool. The fermented foods actually increased gut diversity tremendously. Now, increasing diversity in the gut is like your best risk management. Okay, we can't say with absolute certainty which bacteria are amazing and which ones are bad. We don't know. There's so many of them. We can say a few of them, but we want to have diversity, generally speaking, because it gives us the most flexibility to be able to modulate up and down if we have a nice, diverse microbiome. Fermented foods helped the diversity. The plant-based fibers helped the effectiveness of those bacteria. So you see how a combination of fermented foods with fibers could really be powerful. So you start looking at, okay, well, what do I combine? How do I do this? Being able to increase your fiber intake to support the gut microbiome, and then adding in fermented foods to get a more widely diverse microbiome, and then adding in things like artichoke to help the bile, and then adding in things in like bone broth to help the gut lining. This is how you complete the whole puzzle, all in a nice hermetically sealed environment that is going to make your body thrive the way you want it to. So as always, keep it locked in here on my channel. I'll see you tomorrow.